The forest had grown too quiet long before we saw it. At first, the silence felt like a relief. We had spent the morning pushing through thick undergrowth, snapping twigs and brushing through curtains of damp leaves. When the wind died and the forest settled, it felt like the woods were finally letting us breathe. But after an hour without birds, without insects, without even the creak of branches, the silence stopped feeling peaceful. It started feeling watchful. The trees in that part of the forest were ancient, crooked trunks that twisted upward like broken bones. Moss hung from their limbs in heavy green drapes, and the ground beneath them was thick with decades of fallen needles and soft black soil. Every step sank deeper than it should have. Aaron walked ahead of me, pushing aside low branches. His boots made almost no sound in the moss. "You notice something?" he said quietly. "No birds," I answered. "And no wind." The canopy above us barely moved. The air had that damp stillness you feel near caves or old stone basements. We kept walking. The trail we'd been following had vanished half a mile back, replaced by faint animal paths and instinct. Our compass still pointed us west, but the deeper we moved into the forest, the more the trees seemed to lean in strange directions. Some leaned toward each other in tight pairs. Others bent in wide arcs that formed almost perfect curves. Aaron stopped suddenly. At first I thought he had heard something. Then I saw what he was looking at. In a small clearing ahead of us, someone was kneeling in the dirt. We saw a figure kneeling in the dirt, digging with its bare hands, whispering almost there. The voice carried softly through the still air. "Almost there. Almost there." The figure faced away from us, hunched forward with both hands clawing into the earth. Each movement scraped through damp soil with a slow, grinding sound. Aaron raised a hand for me to stop. We stood partially hidden behind the trees. The figure wore dark clothing, something long and heavy, maybe a coat. The fabric was stiff with dirt and moss. His hands moved quickly, too quickly. They tore through the soil with desperate precision, scooping out handfuls of cold black earth and tossing them aside. "Almost there. Almost there." The voice was low and hoarse, like someone who had been whispering for a long time. Aaron leaned closer to me. "Maybe someone got lost," he murmured. But the words didn't sound convincing. Lost people don't usually dig holes with bare hands. And they don't whisper like that. The hole in front of the figure had grown deeper than I first realized. Dark soil piled around its knees, damp and clumped together. The smell drifted toward us. Cold dirt, rotting leaves, something older. Almost there. The figure stopped digging for a moment. His head tilted slightly, like it was listening. Neither of us moved. After a long pause, the hands resumed their frantic scraping. "Almost there," Aaron whispered. "We should say something." I wasn't sure. The forest around the clearing had a strange shape to it. The trees weren't random here. They formed a loose ring, each trunk spaced evenly apart, their twisted branches arching inward like ribs. I felt a subtle pressure in my ears, like standing near deep water. Aaron took one cautious step forward. "Hey!" he called softly. The digging stopped instantly. The figure froze. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then its head turned slowly toward us. Not fully, just enough that we could see the side of its face through the tangled hair hanging over it. The skin looked wrong, too pale, too stretched across the bone. The mouth moved again, almost there, but the voice didn't come from its lips. Came from the ground. Aaron stiffened beside me. "You hear that?" I nodded. The whisper rose faintly from the open hole. "Almost there." The figure turned back toward the dirt and resumed digging. Faster now. The soil flew behind it in wet clumps. Aaron stepped forward again despite my hand grabbing his sleeve. "Hey!" he said louder. The figure stopped. The shoulders lifted slowly. Then it stood. The motion was strange, stiff, delayed, like someone remembering how a body worked. When it turned fully toward us, I saw its face clearly, or what was left of it. The eyes were open but unfocused. The mouth hung slightly apart. Dirt covered its teeth, and its hands were bleeding. The fingernails had been worn down to red crescents, but the digging hadn't slowed them. Almost there, the ground whispered again. The figure tilted its head. For a moment it seemed confused, like it was trying to recognize us. Then its mouth opened wider. The whisper came from inside its throat this time. Almost there. Behind it, the hole moved, not collapsing, shifting. The soil at the bottom slowly sank inward, like something beneath the forest floor had exhaled. Aaron grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" The figure turned back toward the hole. It dropped to its knees again and resumed digging with violent urgency. The whispering grew louder, not just from the hole now, from the surrounding trees. "Almost there. Almost there." The forest repeated it softly through the moss and bark. A cold breeze moved through the clearing, though the canopy above remained still. Aaron stepped closer to the ring of trees. "Look at the ground," he said. I followed his gaze. Faint lines cut through the soil between the trunks. Not natural lines. Straight ones. They formed a pattern. A spiral. The hole sat at the center. My stomach tightened. "This isn't random," I said. Aaron shook his head slowly. "It's a ritual." The figure suddenly stopped digging again. It reached deep into the hole with both arms. Its shoulders sank into the earth up to the elbows. The whispering grew frantic. "Almost there. Almost there." The ground beneath our feet vibrated faintly. Not shaking. Breathing. The figure pulled something upward. At first I thought it was a root. Then I realized it was moving. A long pale shape rose slowly from the soil, slick with black dirt. Aaron stumbled back. "What is that?" The figure cradled the thing gently. Its head turned toward us again. The pale shape shifted in its hands. I saw fingers, small ones. Then more whispers rose from beneath the forest floor. Hundreds of them. Almost there. The ground around the spiral bulged slightly. Aaron grabbed my arm again. "We need to go." But when we turned toward the forest behind us, the trees had changed. The ring had tightened. Their trunks leaned inward now, forming a crooked wall of bark and moss. Behind us, the digging resumed. The figure had returned to the hole. It lowered the pale shape back into the darkness and began covering it with soil. "Almost there. Almost there." The whispering faded slowly as the dirt packed down. The ground settled. The spiral lines disappeared beneath fresh soil. When the figure finally stood again, it looked calmer. Still, satisfied. It turned its head toward us one last time. For a moment its eyes focused. Truly focused. And I saw something inside them. Not madness. Recognition. Like it knew exactly why we had come. Then the forest made a sound. Not wind. Not branches. Something deeper. The slow shifting of earth beneath miles of roots. The ground at the center of the spiral sank slightly again. And from far below the soil, faint and patient, another voice whispered upward. "Almost there." The fog parted around a shape that wasn't human, but stood like one. I noticed it first through the corner of my eye, a silhouette that clung to the twisted trunks like a shadow trying to take form. The forest had been quiet for hours, so quiet that the soft snap of my boot on moss sounded like gunfire, but now the silence carried a weight, a deliberate anticipation. I froze. The figure didn't move the way any creature should. Its arms hung loosely at its sides, too long, too straight, as if carved from wood and not flesh. The fog curled around its shoulders, swallowing its lower body in a shifting gray tide. And yet, somehow, I knew it was watching me. Not with eyes, not with intent I could comprehend, but with attention that pressed into my chest. A cold, patient awareness that measured my heartbeat and found it wanting. The forest around me was ancient. Gnarled roots twisted above the soil like the veins of some sleeping giant, and every tree seemed to lean inward, not to shelter, but to peer. Moss hung in thick drapes from branches, brushing the ground in strange patterns, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The fog made the world indistinct, but even through the haze I could sense that nothing moved at random. The wind whispered through the canopy, but it carried a rhythm, a language just beyond comprehension, as if the forest itself were breathing in deliberate patterns. I had been following the trail of a vanished hiker for days, my friend, or what remained of him. A faint, dark smear of blood and moss on a tree trunk, then nothing. The local rangers insisted he'd wandered off the marked trails, that the forest was dense but not dangerous. But the whispers that followed me from town to town spoke differently, that the woods had memory, and those who entered uninvited were noticed. I remembered the first night I'd spent here, fog so thick it swallowed sound, a scratching above my tent that circled 3 times, and the feeling, deep in my chest, that I was being measured. I had chalked it up to nerves. Now, standing a few dozen paces from the figure, I knew better. The forest waited, and I was no longer alone. The shape shifted slightly, its head tilted, impossibly smooth, without features, but the motion suggested consideration. My rational mind tried to reason. Tree, stump, trick of light. But the fog moved too fluidly around it, parts disappearing only to reappear in impossible angles, and my ears caught a sound beneath the hum of the wind. A low, resonant vibration, like the chanting of stones. The air pulsed. My chest pulsed. I tried to speak, my voice catching in the damp air. Who's there? My words sounded small, inadequate, like echoes from another world. No answer came, only the movement of the mist, curling like smoke from a fire I could not see. The shape raised one arm, or maybe it had always been raised. The fog made clarity impossible, and pointed toward the deeper woods, where the trees grew denser and the moss thickened into black velvet. I knew instinctively that it was not inviting me. It was showing me. I wanted to flee. My legs trembled, but the forest seemed to stretch, to elongate the distance between me and any familiar path. Roots rose like obstacles that were not there before, and the fog thickened until my hands were swallowed in gray, until I felt the pulse of the forest around me, pressing from all directions. The shape stepped forward. Not quickly, never quickly, but with a deliberate, inevitable motion that bent the fog around it like water. And with each step, the vibration beneath my feet grew stronger, a rhythm I could not escape. I remembered a story my grandfather told me, about trees that remembered the trespasses of humans, about woods where spirits held rituals older than any town. This figure, I realized, was not a spirit in the way we understood spirits. It was a sentinel, a keeper of rites that predated the language of men. The patterns of the moss, the bend of the branches, the way the fog swallowed sound. It was all deliberate, a ritual performed in slow motion over centuries. I was intruding on a ceremony I could never hope to comprehend. A sound rose, faint at first, like 1,000 twigs snapping together, then clearer, closer, snapping, shattering, echoing. It was behind me, above me, everywhere at once. I spun, trying to locate it, but the fog disoriented me. And then I realized. The figure had not moved closer, yet the snapping circled me, perfectly timed with the pulse of my own fear. It was manipulating perception, bending the forest itself into obedience. The silhouette knelt or appeared to kneel. The fog swallowed its form, and then it seemed to rise taller than before. I glimpsed what looked like symbols etched into bark around us, spirals and jagged lines that pulsed faintly with phosphorescent green light. Not carved by human hands. The figure raised both arms slowly, and the forest obeyed. Moss twisted, roots shifted, and the fog swirled into a funnel aimed at me, thickening until the edges of the world disappeared. I stumbled backward, my mind straining for logic. The air vibrated with a sound I couldn't name, a resonance that touched my bones. And then I saw it, small, fleeting shapes in the fog, moving like shadows, not bound by the rules of gravity or time. They coalesced around the figure, forming a crown of impossible angles and jagged limbs. The figure itself did not change, yet its presence became immense, ancient, and cruelly intelligent. It was aware of me, and it had no reason to stop noticing. I realized, with a sudden clarity that made my stomach twist, that the forest did not simply contain the figure. The figure was the forest, or at least its will incarnate. My intrusion was an act observed, measured, recorded. The snapping intensified, as if the trees themselves were applauding or warning me. I tried to speak again, but only a rasp emerged, swallowed by the fog and replaced by the figure's silent communication. Not words, intent, expectation. Hours or maybe seconds, I could not tell, passed. The figure remained, watching, unmoving yet omnipresent. I fell to my knees, pressed my face into the wet earth, hoping for mercy from something beyond mercy. The fog thinned slightly, and in that small window, I glimpsed the forest in its true geometry. Twisted, alive, aware. Every branch, every stone, every root was a note in an impossible symphony, and I was an intruding, discordant chord. I left the trail soon after. I do not know how far I walked, only that the trees continued to whisper and the fog continued to follow. The townspeople asked where I had been. I gave them nothing useful. They would not understand. I do not understand fully myself. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel the figure again. The way it tilts its head. The way it counts, watches, and waits. The forest is not behind me. It is within me, a pulse I cannot ignore. And I know, in the deep, unanswerable corners of my mind, that if I return, the fog will part, the shape will stand, and I will be measured again. The figure is patient. It has all the time in the world, and so does the forest.